Good evening and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. My name is Charlie Krumholtz and I'm a member of the JFK Jr. Forum Committee here at the Institute of Politics. Before we begin, note the exit doors, which are located on both the Park side and the JFK Street side of the forum. In the event of an emergency, please gather your belongings, walk to the exit closest to you, and congregate in JFK Park. Please also take a moment now to silence your cell phones. You can join the conversation tonight online by tweeting with the hashtag Hagel Forum, which is also listed in your program. Tonight's events will begin shortly. Please take your seats now and enjoy the program. Thank you.
Good evening. Well, we've got standing room only up in the back. I'm Karen Mills. I'm delighted to be here. We are very pleased to have our guest tonight. I am a senior fellow at Harvard Business School, but I was a visiting fellow at the IOP and a senior fellow at the Kennedy School. And before that, I had the great honor of serving President Obama as the head of the SBA for 5 years, and serving in the cabinet with our guest tonight, Chuck Hagel. But you're gonna hear more from him in a second. I wanna introduce our IOP resident fellow, an honored guest tonight, Ann Compton, who is going to be our moderator and interviewer. And she was also at the White House at this time, as she said, covering the two of us. We know that she has got many of her students in this room tonight because she is running a very important study group that I hope you all will attend at the IOP called Countdown to #Campaign 2016. And that campaign is almost over, Anne, so results soon, right? But it is about a campaign in the media age. She covered the White House for 40 years for ABC News, spanning 7 presidents and 10 presidential campaigns. And I am very honored and proud to say that she was the first woman assigned by a television network to cover the White House. So I think a round of applause for that, breaking that ceiling. And just one small story about Ann. If you remember 9/11, Ann was actually covering President Bush and traveling with him at the time. And she was the only reporter allowed to stay on Air Force One, and she broadcast that whole terrible series of events to all of us from the side of the president, and won numerous awards for herself and for ABC at the time. So that was truly remarkable. And I want to just read President Obama, when she left the White House press room, he had a great quote. He said, "Ann Compton is not only the consummate professional, but is also a pleasure to get to know." So let's welcome Ann Compton.
Thank you. I want to tell you what you don't know about Chuck Hagel. Yeah. You know he's he was Secretary of Defense. But here's the backstory. He was the first civilian to run the Pentagon who was a foot soldier in Vietnam. 2 Purple Hearts. Back home in Nebraska, he went into business, started a cellular phone company, joined an investment firm in one of the country's reddest states, Nebraska. He was elected as a Republican to the United States Senate the same year that Democrat Bill Clinton was being reelected to a second term. Secretary Hagel, or Senator Hagel at that point, was then reelected to the Senate not long after the September 11th attacks. But he left government after that second Senate term. He returned to private life. He's been involved in business and in education. He's been on corporate boards like the oil giant company Chevron. And he's still a Republican, but Democratic President Barack Obama reached out to Secretary Hagel to become Secretary of Defense. Now, it was a controversial pick. It was a Senate fight. Even some of his fellow Republicans objected to Chuck Hagel, but he was confirmed, and it was probably terrible timing for anybody who was going to become Secretary of Defense. 2 wars that wouldn't stop, and a budget cleaver came down and chopped $50 billion out of his Pentagon budget when Congress was unable to come up with budgets and triggered something called sequestration. In 2 years after he arrived, Secretary Hagel turned in his resignation in what was another somewhat tumultuous episode. Mr. Secretary, we are welcoming you here tonight to say you have now reached a station in life where applause greets you at the door and the next generation of American leaders are eager to hear your wisdom. So with that, I will get to ask a few questions, and then we will we'll open the floor for you. There's an election coming, you may have heard that. And I have heard you say more than once today in talking to students and those of us here at the Kennedy School and at Harvard, that politics reflect society. What in the world does this year say about us?
And first, thank you. And to my former cabinet colleague, Madam Administrator, nice to see you again, thank you. And of course to Graham Allison and many friends here at Harvard, thank you for having me. Some of you know I was on the IOP board for many years. As Ted Kennedy liked to say, as his token Republican on the board. But I have great memories of this institution and the good work you do. So all of you and all of you who are here tonight, thank you. And I think that comment, which I've always believed about politics, that politics reflects society, it doesn't lead society, says this about where America is today. We are, I believe, America at one of those points that historians will reflect on, where there is great distrust in our government, in our leaders, in our politics, and also every institution except the military. I'm not surprised by that when we look at the last 16 years of our history. And you go back no more than 10, but for example, when President Obama took office in January 2009, we were right in the middle of the greatest economic recession, second only to the Great Depression, where most of us here were not alive, 2 wars. A very unhappy America because we were not sure where we were going, why. Seemed that nothing was going right. Our politics had disintegrated really into a very vindictive personalization. And so that is carried forward to today. And we, again, reflecting what politics sees of a society in the world, a world in great turmoil, a great amount of volatility, uncertainty everywhere you look. And it can't help but resonate here in the United States with the citizenry. And so then you add to that a long presidential campaign, which mercifully ends in 7 days, we hope. And the debasement of the process in the last year of our system. We have really, I think, in so many ways offended America and befuddled the world as to, I mean, this is America? We have allowed a personalization, a vilification of attacks on the candidates, and it didn't start just here. It's been evolving. So you've got an off-balance America, you've got a confused America, you've got a disconnected, angry America. They are looking to hold accountable their institutions, and rightfully so. And then again, you magnify that with what's going on in the world. This is one of those times in history that is taking a rather significant dip. And I'm not surprised at the political dynamics in play today. And I think everyone has to take some responsibility. I think our media does, quite frankly. Our media plays on confrontation and conflict. And it's not really about information or enlightening the public. When you were in the business over the last 40 years, how you started, you had a responsibility to the American people to help inform. And that has really shifted and changed. So again, when you add all this up, you get, I think, to this point where, again, I think is an accurate manifestation and reflection of where America today is. Last point I would make, certainly any metric you apply to where America is through polling shows you very clearly that this presidential election is going to all truly revolve around not voting for anyone, it's just voting against someone, and you can extrapolate from that point on. I will end with this. I think this country is so much better than what the world is seeing. This country knows it. I think the people of this country are far ahead, as they normally always are, of institutional leaders, and it always takes time to catch up. I have great confidence that this will get turned around. We're going to be in, I think, for a few more difficult years, but we will turn it around and we'll be a better country for it.
Well, that leads exactly to my next point. It is a very dangerous world right now. It is one that feels very out of balance with old relationships, newer relationships, and the kind of threat against the United States that isn't another state. It is a shadowy movement that has attacked within the United States. Do you think that other world leaders see this as a time of weakness of the United States, or do they think the kind of judgment that either candidate, should he or she become president, that they would find the United States in less of a position to be a world leader?
Well, I think that is an observation, a conclusion that many nations have drawn for obvious reasons.
You still travel a lot, so
I still travel a lot, and I talk to world leaders all the time. And I listen carefully to what they say, and there's not a leader that I've talked to or a senior representative of a government that is not necessarily in some state of panic, but a lot of concern about where is all this going. How is the United States going to be able to lead over the next 4 years after you've just come through this? Will the United States abdicate its traditional post-World War II leadership? Is it now too much of a burden for the United States? And these are legitimate questions I think world leaders have, our allies have. And the next president's going to have to address this, and I think address it very quickly, right up front, with not just different optics, but probably some significant policy issues. I don't expect a new president to come into office and you know how this works as well as anybody, and many of you do here. have all the policy down. I get that. It takes some time. But there will not be a lot of time here because the expectations in some ways are going to be higher than at other times. Other ways it will be lower because this has been the whole campaign kind of a lowest common denominator of doom. And that's not who Americans are. We are a hopeful, positive nation that sees a new president, a new administration with some renewal, some hope, some new possibilities. I'm not sure the world buys into that now.
Well, can you think of specific things that either candidate as the new president should or could do right out of the gate to either reassure the allies or to express to the world that the United States is still in a position of leadership?
There are a couple of thoughts I have about that to answer your question. Number one, I would advise whoever the next president is the first thing, or certainly the first week or 2 weeks that they do, is they take a trip to Capitol Hill. And they sit down with both the Republicans and the Democrats and reach out and engage and let the Congress know that this new president wants to work with them. They won't always agree, but this new president needs their help. The country needs us working together. I would come right out of the blocks on this. And that's what leadership's about. Engagement is strength, it's not weakness. And I think, quite frankly, the Obama administration has made a lot of its own problems because it has not done that. On the other side, when the Republican leader says a few years ago, what is the priority of the new Republican Senate for the next 2 years? And he says, to defeat everything President Obama sends up here, that's not a particularly conducive, high-minded, high-spirited way to govern. So both sides have not done well in this and made mistakes. First, that's what I would suggest. Second, more on a world stage. I think this new president is going to have to make a trip fairly soon to Europe and Asia. And third, I would reach out fairly soon and reach out for I wouldn't even call it a summit. I'd call it a meeting with President Putin. Again, I've always seen engagement not as appeasement or weakness. Great powers engage. And that's a secure nation and a secure leader who takes the initiative to reach out and engage. And I think the Russians are important in this for a lot of reasons. We have a lot of common interests. I would factor those common interests into all these relationships, just as our great leaders did after World War II. I think we are living at somewhat of an equally important time, Ann, like after World War II, meaning this. I think we are seeing a new world order being defined right now and being built. The big difference is the United States is not the dominant and only economic power that is leading that. But we would have never been able to do the things that we did after World War II, building these coalitions of common interests without alliances and without the relationships and basing those relationships on the common interests of all nations. You don't start with the differences, you start with where we can cooperate. I think that Putin meeting is absolutely critical. Middle East, Ukraine, cyber, everywhere. But again, that doesn't show weakness. That doesn't show appeasement. It shows strength. We've got options. We are the most powerful, dominant nation on earth. And we shouldn't abuse that. We shouldn't flout that. But we should be secure in that.
Didn't the Obama administration, President Obama, in some ways, step back from that leadership role. He was criticized for leading from behind, to some extent in the Middle East, relying on allies to go in and help with Iran. And certainly when you get to Syria, and the president drew a red line in the sand on chemical weapons and then never enforced that. Can you talk a bit about your relationship during those 2 years working as a Republican? It's not unusual for a president to pick a Democratic president to pick a Republican to serve in his cabinet. Bill Clinton did it to an extent. Robert Gates was also, he did it with Bill Cohen, but Robert Gates was also held over from a Republican administration. Talk to the students candidly about how you related and your relationship with President Obama.
Well, first, I had a very good relationship with President Obama, then Senator Obama. He served on the Foreign Relations Committee. We personally got along very well. And he's been very generous and kind in acknowledging publicly that I helped him a lot when he first went to the Senate. And I hope I did. Joe Biden and I are very close friends, and we've traveled all over the world together many, many times. And I always developed relationships, friendships, not based on whether we agree or not. I mean, Obama and Biden's voting record versus mine was about as far apart as you're going to get. But I never predicated my friendships and relationships based on how we vote, or Democrat versus Republican. So that was the beginning. And then the president asked me, when he took office, to co-chair his the President's Intelligence Advisory Board.
And that's an important group. Tell them what it does. It's very important behind the scenes.
He asked me to co-chair it with former Oklahoma Senator Dave Bourne, who had been chairman of the Intelligence Committee before President Obama got to the Senate. He's now president of the University of Oklahoma. He was former governor of Oklahoma. First-class person, first-class, smart. So it was a great opportunity. For 4 years I did that. It's not a full-time job, but the role of that position, and some presidents have used it very well, and a lot, others not really. President Obama did the first term because we had a tremendous group of people on that board who were very accomplished people, and the White House used us as sources to go to and say, what do you think? Can you do this? Give us a report, whatever. And Bourne and I'd go over and see the president one-on-one, often. That was pretty unusual. The president put a lot of credibility in that relationship. So the personal relationship was all part of this, I think, too. And the president knew kind of what I thought about things. But second, I never thought and never saw the job of Secretary of Defense as a partisan job. I didn't ever think it was Republican or Democrat. The security of this country, the defense of this country is beyond any political borders or boundaries. It's for all of us as Americans. So it was easy for me to make that adjustment. It would have been different if the president would have asked me to join his cabinet in a more political agenda kind of a way. So I think those are the two main factors, and that connected the president and me. Yeah, it was a very rocky, bumpy confirmation process because of I got caught in the windstorm of the anti-Obama crowd and so on, and then I had not supported my old friend John McCain in 2008. I didn't support Obama, by the way. I didn't support anybody. Because of Iraq, our differences on Iraq, and I thought if John was, and I have the highest regard for John McCain, but as I told him, I thought if he was elected, we would have more of the same, and I thought it was terribly wrong, and more troops in Iraq, and so on and so on. So there was just a lot of things that got caught in that, and it's just, it's a tough business on a good day, but you accept that that's all part of it. Now, as that leads into Syria, and I've said so publicly, I think we first have to acknowledge, as I used to say to the President Obama, I don't know of a more difficult time for a leader of a country, especially in a democracy, than right now, than these last few years, because of the complications, the combustibility, the dangers, the uncertainty, the volatility of everything that's going on. I mean, every democracy in this world today, principally in Europe, is under some attack. Rise of nationalism, populism, every leader is under some attack. I mean, look at the Brexit issue is one. So we're not unique to that. Again, we reflect our political order, what's going on everywhere. So that said, the complications, the difficulty, and I recognize the president surely did not want to get America back into another Middle East problem. And so he was very cautious about that, and I thought that that was a prudent, responsible approach. So, I mean, everything was very measured and very, very careful. But what really, two things really changed that. One is when ISIS, which we had known about, and our intelligence community was aware of, but when they crossed that border into western Iraq, and took control of large portions, sections of western Iraq, because two Iraqi regular army divisions laid down their weapons and ran away. I think ISIS was stunned at that. And ISIS marched right into Mosul and right into all those cities in western Iraq, came right up to the international airport in Baghdad at one time. There was no opposition because of, in my opinion, Maliki had so destroyed the power sharing of Sunni Shia Kurds in the government over 5 years and squandered that opportunity. The Sunnis initially embraced ISIS, said it's better than the Shia government in Baghdad, because Maliki had neutered the Sunnis in the military and so on. What ISIS got a hold of was American armories that we had turned over to the Iraqis, full of American equipment and tanks and APCs and rockets and sophisticated weapons. They looted the banks. They took control of everything. That wasn't an American problem. I mean, that wasn't our fault. I mean, we had invested quite a bit in Iraq. And this was an entire two divisions walking away. So that event right there was one of the turning points. Then I think in the Syria, and it all comes together. I don't think you can take Iraq alone, or Syria alone, or Yemen alone. This is a regional issue because it's historically a sectarian, religious, tribal, ethnic, post-colonial authoritarian hangover, and all this stuff is mixed in this toxic brew throughout the Middle East. The issue of the red line. Now, the president had made that statement before I became Secretary of Defense, but even go back before that when the president made the comment at a news conference that Assad must go. But there was never any carry-through on what that meant. So our allies there, Saudi Arabia and others, and Turkey, said, well, what does that mean? Assad must go, but you're doing nothing about it. And the president was very clear. I surely don't want a war with Syria. I don't want any boots on the ground in Syria. I don't want to have one casualty in Syria. Made those points very clear. But then when the red line was issued, the president made that, again, before I got there. And then everyone knows what happened, and the Syrian army used the red line. I mean, they used chemical weapons. And then we had to verify that, and there was a process to the UN, and it came back, and yes, it was Syrian troops, Assad's troops, so on. And then the president was in a very difficult spot, because when a president of the United States lays out a position, that means something, especially to our allies in the area. It also means something to our adversaries. It means they watch that as more than our allies do. And when you don't carry through with that, there's always a price to be paid in credibility, in trust. And so when we had the thing put together, we were going to do it, and then it was pulled down at the last minute. I heard from all our allies, wherever I was, in NATO, Middle East, you know, we can't trust America, you won't follow through, and so on. So, in my opinion, we've really never had a coherent policy on this, and then I got into trouble too. There was a memo that I wrote to Secretary Kerry and National Security Advisor Susan Rice, saying in a 2-page memo that essentially we didn't have a policy, and we're suffering great credibility gaps, and we need to pay attention to this, and we've got to do something. And I wasn't blaming anybody. I was part of the National Security Council, and said this has got to be, must be a priority. And I had copies of that delivered to the White House as well, to the President and the Vice President. The New York Times got a hold of it. The reporter evidently saw the memo, and what was in that story was accurate. I mean, there was nothing inaccurate about it. So that didn't enhance my standing in particular, but there were other issues as well. But it's a tough issue, and I know the intentions of the president and what he did not want to do. He didn't want to get America drugged back in to another one of these fiascos that you can't get out of. And really, in the end, how much difference are we making? You know, in Afghanistan, Taliban controls more territory in Afghanistan today than it has at any time in the last 15 years. And we're going into our 16th year there. The fact is, and I think the president got this and understood it, the problems in the Middle East or Afghanistan or anywhere else, they're not going to be fixed by the United States. They're not going to be fixed by the West. They're surely not going to be fixed by our military. We can help, we can support, we can reinforce, but the people of those areas have to do this, and it's tough. And I think maybe the White House, that was their position. I got it, by the way. I generally supported that, but that doesn't mean that you can allow a vacuum to exist and walk away from not making any choice or any decision. And we kind of did that. One last point on this, just to kind of bring it home to a real life episode, and I mentioned this in a couple of sessions today. When we came up with the policy, the strategy, because the president gave us very, very clear guidelines on what we could do, but mainly what we couldn't do to deal with this. The process of vetting and recruiting rebels that we would train and arm and insert into Syria. And we had those training bases in different countries in the Middle East. And it never really worked well for a lot of reasons. But the instructions that they were given and told, your job is to go fight ISIS and to eliminate ISIS in Syria, but not Assad, not the Syrian army. Well, most of those people that we were recruiting hated Assad worse than ISIS. Didn't like either one, but they hated certainly Assad as much. So we never gave them clear instructions on this, except your job is not to fight Assad. We're not in a war with Assad. We kept emphasizing. So I'm before the House Armed Services Committee one morning, and a congressman asked me, and we're explaining the system, General Dempsey and I, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, explain the policy in which we were. Then he said, Mr. Secretary, I want to ask you a question. If these rebels that you insert, that you train, you find, you vet, you arm, and you insert into Syria, if they're attacked by Assad's forces, are you going to defend them? Well, we didn't have a policy on that. So I'm Secretary of Defense sitting there, and there's sure as hell no way I could say no, because if I would have said that, there wouldn't be one person stepping forward to go volunteer. You're going to ask me to go kill these guys, but when Assad comes after me, and now you've just told everybody that go ahead, Assad, slaughter us because we won't do anything. I couldn't say no. I had to say yes. Well, that again put me in a little different position because we just never ever really dealt with that. So these are tough, complicated issues that are going to have to be dealt with, and the longer this fiasco in the Middle East goes, the worse it's going to get for everybody, and you will continue to see the systematic slaughter and systematic destruction of most of the Middle East. I mean, you look at these cities in Syria, what's left? I mean, I don't know on Mosul, for example, how much damage is going to be there. I mean, because of the forces are so superior, we'll eventually drive ISIS out of Mosul. I mean, that'll happen. But the real questions are, like the bottom line on all this, what happens then? What happens next? Who governs? Are you going to be able to start resolving these age-old problems, Sunni, Shia, Kurds? Because you've got Kurdish forces in this invasion. You've got Iranian militias in this invasion. You've got Turkish forces coming in from the northwest in this. And Iraq, and we've got some of our people on the ground. Boy, now how do you fix this all back up after ISIS is gone? Big, big issues that the next president's going to be dealing with.
How do you think history will judge Barack Obama, or is it too early to even think about that?
Well, I think it takes some time for history to reflect on any presidency, especially an 8-year presidency. Decisions made by any president, I think, need some time away from it to see, if nothing else, to evaluate consequences, effects that occurred as a result of those policies or those decisions. I mean, I've used examples, and you know this, these people in this room, when Truman left office, he couldn't have gotten elected dog catcher of Independence, Missouri. Historians now reflect back on that time saying he's a pretty damn good president, made some very tough decisions, and most of them were right. Eisenhower was another one. Kind of a doddering old man, played golf, didn't do much. Well, unfortunately for Eisenhower, some of the greatest things that he did never get recorded as accomplishments, because if you keep a nation out of war and you do the job you're supposed to do, that's not worthy of the history books, but it really is when you go back and now Eisenhower's presidency is being reviewed, and now most historians say Eisenhower was one of our best presidents. So it's going to take some time, I think, for history to reflect back on the Obama administration, and we'll see.
It's time for you all to take control of the questioning, and I'd like to point, there are 4 microphones, 2 of them on the floor here, and then 2 up in, I'm not sure where I see, oh yes, you can see the microphones up on the 2nd level. And I'd ask each of the questioners, if you'd please identify yourself, ask a question, end it with a question mark, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. Mr. Secretary, how about starting up right here?
Okay.
Hello.
Good evening, sir. Thank you for speaking to us. My name is Elena Davitt. I'm a sophomore at the college and also a midshipman in ROTC here. And my question was, with new headline issues seeming to arise each day, from ISIS to Russia to cyber attacks to North Korea, as Secretary of Defense, did you have a clear list of priorities in terms of conflicts to focus on? And if so, what would you consider to be the greatest threat to our national security today?
I'll start with your last question. There are many threats to our security, and many new emerging and evolving challenges, but that's history. That's the history of mankind. I mean, we're not the first generation to face new threats and challenges. Ours are more sophisticated, but as the great historians have said, it's not about new challenges. It's always about how you respond. It's always the challenge-response dynamic. So cyber, I would include in that as one of the biggest threats to our security. is this insidious, quiet, out of nowhere comes devastating attacks on our systems. You can neutralize satellites, capabilities of the Defense Department and others, power grids, financial institutions, certainly the threat of mining emails and all the shenanigans that have been going on here. Without moving a ship, without putting a boot on the ground, without flying a plane, you're never quite certain if, in fact, this was inspired by a government. You can kind of eventually get where it came from, but was this actually the Iranian government or the Russian government? Then how do you retaliate? What measures? Who do you retaliate against? I mean, these are all big issues. Certainly nuclear is going to continue to be a threat. Obviously terrorism is a threat. Chemical, biological weapons are continued threats. So we've got many threats. They're complicated, and we have to prepare for all. And you asked the priority question. I think not unlike a president, when President Obama came into office in January 2009, it was faced with two wars, the greatest financial crisis since the Great Depression, a lack of confidence in our government and politics, not as bad as it is today, but it wasn't good. He was confronted with huge challenges. This president is going to be confronted with, in some ways, even more complicated challenges. So priorities are set, yes, by presidents. That becomes a secretary's priority, whatever the presidents are. But you also, as Secretary of Defense, have the responsibility of carrying out just the day-to-day responsibilities of the Defense Department. So yes, you prioritize in certain ways, but everything is equally important in certain ways. When there's a war on, that's obviously your number one priority. What Bob Gates was dealing with, for example, when he came in, he had two wars raging. Well, that had to be his priority, and that was. When I came in, I presided over the unwinding of Afghanistan, getting all of our people out. Those were new kinds of priorities and challenges. They were huge challenges for the military, and it was magnificent, the job they did. We were out of Iraq, but yet we were starting to kind of inch back because of what was going on with ISIS, and then all these other issues. So the priorities have to be, yes, in place, but you've got to deal with all of the things that force their way into that priority agenda as well. And that's going to be as big an issue for this next president as it was for President Obama.
I want to get to as many of these questions as we can. We'll come down to the floor right here. Thank you.
My name is Greg Morey. I live here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. But I want to tell you, I live right across the street from the O'Neill family, Tip O'Neill. Certainly do. But my family came from Damascus, Syria. And I followed my family tree all the way back. We have an orphanage in Damascus. When my grandfather left Damascus, he left his house to an orphanage. So what do you do with Assad, who's killing people?
Thank you. Let the secretary.
And my uncle ran the Library of Congress for Franklin Roosevelt. He was a full Syrian Christian. His name is Joe Saki.
Okay.
And Jim Roosevelt, the Roosevelts are my witnesses, Jim Roosevelt. So what do we do with Assad killing people? And what do we get in its place if we were to remove him?
Yeah.
Good question.
Thank you.
Great question.
Thank you very much. We're going to come right up here. Thank you.
Jay Gleason, your nomination for Secretary of Defense was dogged by the Israel lobby. What can be done to curb the influence, both on foreign policy and defense policy, of the baleful Israel lobby that insinuates itself in so many decisions, such as your nomination process?
Could you hear that?
Well, I'll take that one, and then I'll come back on yours. Well, first of all, I didn't have any priority or make a priority of mine to go after the Israeli lobby to try to inhibit or cut their influence in our country with our Congress. We have a democracy. We have an open system. Lobby for anybody you want and any cause you want. That wasn't my role as Secretary of Defense. My role was very clear. That was the security and defense of this country. So their opposition to me, I got it. But the first month I was in office, the first trip I took was to the Middle East. And the first country I went to was Israel. And the defense minister of Israel, Bogi Ya'alon, who has since resigned and actually was forced out by Netanyahu. But he and I developed a very close relationship. And he knew that stuff was nonsense. And most of the Israeli government officials, I'd worked with Ehud Barak for years, many of the Israeli leaders. They knew that was complete babble. But, you know, it is what it is. But certainly I wasn't going to take any vindictive position to use my influence to go after anybody. I had a hell of a lot more important things to do and worry about that. Tough business. Your question was a difficult thing for you to bring up. I know your family. Assad. This is an issue his future, the Syrian government's going to have to be dealt with. But we are where we are now with the Iranians and the Russians supporting him. And it's going to take us working with this coalition to resolve the future of Assad and the next Syrian government. I don't believe personally that there will be any way Assad has a future or can stay. But when you start asking the question, well, he's got to go, what are we going to do about him? Then you get into the real hard stuff that presidents have to deal with. So you want to go to war with Russia and Iran over Assad? This is a despicable human being, absolutely. But the reality is, how do you do this? And without making it far worse. And I think the smart way to do it, as I said a few minutes ago, I think we've got to find some common ground with Putin to start working through this. The Iranians are going to have to be part of this. Now, we may like that or not like that, but they're not going anywhere. They're there. They're the most sophisticated state sponsor of terrorism. They have a huge reach in that area. I mean, just for example, what just happened in Lebanon with the new president, that really enhances Iran's power in Lebanon. So it's a difficult thing, but we're going to have to deal with it. I get the emotion of it, the slaughter, not as close to it as you are, but again, the choices that a president has are tough choices. Is your choice then to go to war with Russia and Iran to get him out? Well, I'm not sure that's a smart way to do it. So I don't think that's an option. But I know some people think that.
I just know if,
whatever.
What would take his place? You know, it would be a toughest thing going on right now.
No,
Thank
it
you,
is.
Chuck.
It is.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Inada Shiraz, and I'm a student here at the college. During your talk, you mentioned a threat that is persistent throughout many democratic countries, and I was wondering, especially with the rhetoric of Republican nominee Donald J. Trump, the use of threat has been very alienating to many minorities, immigrants, people of color. So if you could further articulate in your mind who precisely is the threat, is it ISIS, is it more ideological? And if you were to continue to be the whisper very much needed within the president's ear for the next president and for the next 4 years, what would be the first steps you would recommend to ensuring a strong national defense strategy in dealing with these issues?
Well, to answer that question, I've already laid out what I would recommend the President do very quickly. The visit to Capitol Hill, Europe, Asia, and set up a face-to-face 2 days with Putin. Because I think that encompasses so much of our national security and our interests. Because within that agenda, you should be talking about trade once again. I mean, you should be talking about all of our interests in those visits, those state-to-state, face-to-face. On your more political questions involving Trump and security and what's most important, I mean, the question that you ask is very insightful because it dwells on the strength, the internal strength of a democracy being capable of governing itself. And that's a really important point because we've really not governed in this country the last few years. I've said today, when I got to the Senate 20 years ago, we passed appropriations bills, all appropriations, 11 appropriations bills every year. We had budgets. We'd fight like hell, argue and debate, but we'd come together at the end and compromise, terrible word, I know, compromise, and make it work. We did that because most Democrats and Republicans understood their job was helping govern our country, and that meant moving America forward, not backward. And so we haven't done that. And it is a threat to our security, absolutely, because it paralyzes our system, it paralyzes our decision making, it paralyzes our population, because as we've already talked, America is disgusted with all of us and the system and all parties. And you've got to have the American people behind you, especially in foreign policy, or if you do have to use the military in any way that fits into your larger geopolitical diplomatic strategy, and only then should you ever use your military. Don't lead with the military. The American people have to be part of that. You can't exclude them from that. So it is a dangerous issue. It does affect our ability to make these tough choices, and our adversaries are not unaware of this, nor are our allies. Now, this is aside from the obvious threats, terrorism and so on and so on that we've already talked about. So your questions are very relevant.
We're going to try to squeeze in two more before the clock runs out. Yes, right here.
Yes, sir. My name is Gabe Gladstein. I'm a student at the college and a cadet in Army ROTC. My question regards the future of warfare and your view on it. The first part of it, as you mentioned before, new technologies like cyber and drones are allowing us to wage war without troops in the air, troops on the ground, troops in the sea. So my question, first, in future defense budgets, do you think we're going to be looking at massive cuts in numbers of troops in favor of greater focus on these sorts of technologies, using these technologies to wage war? And secondarily, do you think that these technologies enable or even force us to wage a sort of perpetual warfare that doesn't end because it's so easy for us to continue?
That's a very good question, and I'll try to give you a couple short answers. Your second point really, if you want to condense it down into one word or two words, antiseptic warfare. No muss, no fuss, hit them from all done. Not really. Not really. The hatred that engenders in people, and we're seeing it in Yemen today. You see it in every war. But there is a risk and there is a downside to precision weapons. Absolutely there is. Because there is a question about accountability. Now, I've been in a war, in a pretty bad war. The atrocities that occur in any war, every war, there's no excuse for it, but they do. And the drones and the sophistication of the weapons make it easier. You're exactly right to turn your head on this. So I think your question's very appropriate. It is a huge issue. The next president's going to deal with and successive presidents, because there is no quick answer. We've got to stay ahead of the Russians and the Chinese and everyone in technology, and we have, and we continue to stay ahead of them. But we have no choice, because the sophistication of weaponry now is getting to the point where it's setting in a whole new dynamic in battlefield issues and security. So I think this is a big. It's not just ethical, but it's real for our security.
And perpetual warfare?
Perpetual warfare, yes, because that's a consequence of this. It is easy, and the cuts on trade-offs between, I think you said massive cuts or big cuts versus the sophisticated weaponry. I mean, we've been cutting every year more and more to downsize from the two concurrent wars that we were in, Afghanistan and Iraq. And we're doing that, but we've got to be very careful that we don't cut too far, because we are, I believe, as far as the eye can see, we're always going to need a standing army and Marines and ships and Air Force, aside from the new dynamic of special operations, cyber, drones. So it's a balance, and you got to be smart about this. And it is a prioritization in that balance of what you think is most effective to defend the interests of this country, not just today or tomorrow or next year, but the dynamic of what's coming over the horizon that you cannot predict right now. Technology always outraces everything.
Right here.
Hello, Secretary Hagel. My name is Alejandro Jimenez, and I'm a freshman at the college. Just based on your interaction with the president and the current state of the election, what personal qualities do you think are necessary for our next president?
Yeah, good question. Well, I've always believed that there are three indispensable requisites for leadership, and whether you're president. Not many people get to be president, so most of us are not in that category, but I would say this for the president, to answer your question, but any leadership capacity, whether it's in a university or military, whatever. Character, courage, and judgment. Experience is important. I don't think it's a requisite, quite frankly. Because in the end, what I saw, I've worked for three presidents. I've known them all since Nixon and worked with all of them in some way. But I've been in three administrations. And what I saw, it is consistent as the sun comes up in the morning. In the end, at the end of the day, when the tough choices have to be made, it's judgment. The president gets the information, he relies on people, but only one person is there at the end of the day to make that tough call. And that's a judgment call. Experience helps, yes, but it has to fundamentally start with character, the character of the person. Because the character of the person will always opt for doing the right thing. Courage. You got to have courage, because you're going to have to make some tough choices, and meaning you're going to make some wrong choices. And so those are the three indispensables. And I have to say, in what I saw in President Obama, and I worked with him for 6 years, I think he fulfills all three of those criteria. I really do. I think he's got all three. And I mean, no president's perfect. Every president makes mistakes. We all make mistakes. I cast votes I wish I could get back. I've said stupid things I wish I hadn't said. But presidents don't have the luxury of, well, I'm just kidding, let's redo it. You know, it isn't that. But no, I think President Obama fulfills those three boxes as well as any president I've ever seen. I worked for two other presidents who I think did the same. President Bush Sr. and President Reagan. And I think that those are the marks of the greatest leaders in every institution.
Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, thank you. On behalf of those who have been drawn here to the Institute of Politics and the Kennedy School, where the mission really is the next generation of those who will lead in the public interest.
Well, it is, and I again want to end this with thanking you in this institution, and especially your wrap-up comment, Ann, because that's what it is. It's all about that. It's prepare, it's encourage, it's help inform, and it's all of those, and this institution does it about as well as anyone else. Politics is still a noble business. Public service is a noble business. And I think we're going to see come out of this dip a response to that will be very significant and will hold this country in great stead. And to you, Ann, thanks for your many, many years of real journalistic service, because I have to say, in my opinion, I don't think there are real journalists out there as much as there were. You can't say anything, I know, but I can.
Thank you.
But Ann was a real journalist at an important time, and boy, you covered the big historical and did it well.
Ladies and gentlemen, Chuck Hagel.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Now, Krishna,
Thank you, sir. We'll go right over there.